Okay, explain three things you learned about assessing emergent bilinguals, students in content areas. The first thing I learned is that um, it's really important to focus on what they know about the content, and not just their English skills. So if a student might fully understand a science concept or a math problem, but if they struggle to express it in English, a traditional test won't show that they know the content. So this made me realize that language can sometimes get in the way of showing the understanding. Um, and so assessments have to be designed in a certain way to reduce that barrier, for that emergent bilingual student. The second thing I learned is that there has to be an alternative, or I learned that alternative and performance based assessments can be really effective. Um, so instead of just giving a written test, you could have the student show their knowledge through drawings, or an oral explanation, or just like basically this. If it's better for them to just be expressing themselves through a video, or talking, then um, it allows them to be more, um, or like be more engaged and participate and be able to show their understanding of the content. And then the last thing I learned is that it's really important to modify assessments and provide accommodations. And this can include just simplifying the instructions of the assessment, or using visuals, giving sentence starters, or just even allowing like extra time, um, um, because they don't necessarily make the work easier, they just make it accessible for the student, so that they can show their understanding without being limited by you know not knowing English. How I can apply this as a teacher. I want to teach kindergarten, so I could have the students just um, draw and label parts of their of a plant or something, and then just explain their thinking out loud, instead of like having like a test and then it just have instructions and then they just have to like complete the test. um, or they could do performance-based assessments where they can role play, or have like hands-on activities, so that they can show that what they know in different ways. um, I could also provide visuals, word banks, sentence starters, um, all of this to show to so that they can show their learning. Um, why is it important for me as a teacher to learn about language proficiency? Understanding language proficiency is super important because it helps me accurately assess what students know. So without it, I could assume that students are struggling academically, when really the challenge would be how proficient they are in expressing their knowledge in English. So if I'm aware about, language proficiency, that could help me create a more inclusive classroom, and then be able to provide the right accommodations for these students, um, so that, they can feel confident in their learning. And then explain three things you learned about language objectives. The first thing was that, um, language objectives is when they clearly define how students will use language to engage with the lesson content. So they're not separate from the lesson, but instead work alongside the content objectives to help students understand and express their learning. So they're not just learning about like a specific science content, but they're learning how to describe and explain that specific content using the correct academic language. Um, this helps me make expectations more like specific for all learners. Another thing I learned is that language objectives focus on specific components of academic language, such as vocabulary, the language functions, and language structures. This could include key terms students use in the lesson, like comparing or summarizing or justifying ideas. Um, the last thing I learned is that there's 4 domains. So speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And they help teachers, plan intentional scaffolds for students, especially English learners. Explain how I can use this as a teacher. I can apply this knowledge by intentionally planning both content and language objectives for each lesson. So if my kindergartners are learning about, a math content about how to add to 10, I could use specific language objectives that would focus on how the students will explain their thinking using a sentence stem. Like, I made 10 by using 5 and 5. This allows every student in the class to not only be able to express how they learned the concept, but also using the correct terminology or vocabulary to express their understanding. And I could do this by pre-teaching that vocabulary beforehand, so that the students know what vocabulary to use. Yeah, that's it.